Outside my office door, my secretary, who had only been with me for 6 months, was screaming at a man who was trying to break in. Judging by the sounds, there were guards there too. Yet Mandy, the temp I liked, faithfully fought them all off. But I didn't know how long she could do this. If I had a future in this company, I would give her a raise. It's time to make a decision. My actions were to radically change my life. I carefully dialed the number that I had to look up on my iPhone. Hello? Hi, Randy. My name is Jim Reynolds. I need you to process an order from me. It all started about a week ago. Just sign it, Jim, Andrew told me. I've already checked everything. This is the standard template for an IPO. Just don't sell the stock until I tell you to. I took a good look at Andrew Schwartz, our corporate bully. There was irritation and fatigue on his face. This was what seemed like the 10,000th document I had signed in the past week, and we were all on edge. Harry Loeb, our unfortunately named lawyer, nodded at me. Both of them have been with me since we founded Ipswich Inc. a few years ago, so I signed up. Finally, Gordon Jenkins opened a bottle of champagne and poured us some glasses so the four of us could celebrate our listing on NASDAQ as a new IPO on Monday. Ipswich Inc. develops software for router systems, and if I may, we are truly innovative. Andrew ran the business, Gordon oversaw installation and product development, Harry was our lawyer, and I wrote the code. Of course, everything was a little more complicated. We had 100 employees and were looking to get money to hire more. Numerous companies were interested in our work, and our performance was good enough for Andrew to introduce our company to several underwriting banks. We weren't big enough to interest the likes of Goldman Sachs, although they had a small stake in us through some complex financial machinations that I couldn't be bothered to understand. My job is to code and organize my programmers so that everyone is moving in the same direction. That's why we had Andrew. He was doing business. We finished our toasts and Andrew came up to me, putting his hand on my shoulder. How are you doing with the nerd herd? Is there a new version on the way? I sighed. Please don't let them hear you call them that. Yes, we are on schedule and everything should be ready soon. This was a constant point of contention between us. Andrew was pushing for new products for his sales team, and I wanted to make sure the product was quality while keeping our current customers in mind. I worked in the field of it and programming for a long time, even before the founding of our company, and I knew that unsatisfied clients quickly become former clients. Of course, we often butted heads, but with Harry and Gordon as referees, we developed a working relationship, and we found a balance. He pushed me to be productive, and I curbed his over-enthusiasm. You're going to have problems with the IPO and with the stock, Andrew said, referring to my position on the board of directors. I completed my studies in 2000 and then got a job at one of the technology companies. My new wife, Ellie, and I were optimistic about my prospects, and my first job included a generous stake in the company. Those who remember that time know how many tech companies failed. While we weren't one of those paper millionaires who ended up drowning in debt, our compensation package left us with nothing when my first job fell through. It was a very cold and lonely time to be a programmer. Many of my classmates found themselves in the same situation. Based on my experience, I insisted that we pay our programmers a salary rather than simply provide stock in a private company. Andrew believed that it would be cheaper and more effective in terms of motivation to give away shares. After eating my share of post-college instant noodles, I disagreed. This was brought up for discussion by our council, the four of us. Gordon supported me since we were the same age, but Andrew showed us the financial calculations and Harry worked out a compromise. Everyone was paid a base salary, but they could receive shares instead of bonuses and other compensation. This agreement was so good that both Andrew and I were equally dissatisfied. Nevertheless, he was right. Those who bought the shares now had every chance that their value would rise significantly in the next 3 months. Those who didn't buy it might not be happy about it. Several employees tried to renegotiate their compensation packages at the last minute. We should get back to the party, I said. Of course, this final moment of signing had to be celebrated with a holiday. Andrew insisted on this. On the one hand, we needed to keep our venture investors in good spirits. On the other hand, those of us who were married had a responsibility to please our wives. The last few months have been very stressful. We had analysts breathing down our necks. We were vetting underwriters who wanted to work with us. Starting an IPO is like a teen romance. Both participants evaluate each other, trying to understand whether we are sexy enough for the skyrocketing stocks and whether we are stable enough for long-term investing. This meant long hours of work. Andrew, being a bachelor, lived in business, and it cost him nothing. Even at the party, he had a TV with CNBC somewhere in his line of sight, albeit with no sound. "How are you and Ellie?" he asked as we reached the top level, overlooking his living room. It was all typical Andrew, modern, open, with lots of windows. The entire back wall was a continuous window. I looked at my wife, with whom I had been together for 11 years. She was in her element, communicating, charming guests, even flirting with friends and business partners who were invited. Her blonde hair moved as she smiled and listened to some joke told by an older man, one of our first investors. His hand lay familiarly on her elbow. She laughed, gently touched his chest with her hand, took a step back and raised her empty glass, indicating that she was going for a new portion of the drink. It was a practiced gesture that set boundaries without offending the other person. Overall, pure Ellie. "Well, you know, Andy, it's like a sine wave. Now up, now down." I made a curve with my hand in the air. "You're such a nerd," he laughed. I pretended to laugh with him. "I'm not a nerd, I'm a budding entrepreneur. Don't quit your main job." I looked at him. "Why are you asking? You all complained about your wives and so on." I decided to ask. I frowned. She was annoyed by my long hours working on the code, but I think when she sees the money that the IPO will bring, she will compensate for it. If there's one thing she loves more than me, it's money. He laughed in agreement. Ellie had long wanted to live in grand style and realized her desires as much as possible, as soon as our budget allowed it. We sometimes argued about this, but nothing out of the ordinary, as I thought at the time. I left Andrew and walked over to where Ellie was talking to a couple, stopping at the buffet along the way and filling a plate with snacks. The woman was a typical California girl in a green dress, and the man had a masculine appearance and wavy brown hair. It was time to show the flag. Ellie was talking animatedly with them, catching my approach out of the corner of her eye. "This is funny. Here comes Jim," she introduced me, raising her hand and pointing in my direction. "Her husband is Jim," I clarified. She made that little pause that meant she was offended by my comment, but continued as if nothing had happened. "Of course, you are my husband. We have the same wedding rings, silly." She emphasized the word stupid a little more strongly. "Well, of course, we noticed," the woman said, laughing. "Do you wear a wedding ring?" the man asked with a grin. The woman playfully slapped his arm, pursing her lips. "Behave yourself." He laughed. "Kidding. I'm Phil, and this is my wife, Terry. So, buddy, don't make eye contact with her." He hugged her waist. I extended my hand. "Jim Reynolds." We shook hands. The boundaries were outlined, and the conversation went on as usual. Everything was going well. He had several questions about business, which I was able to answer more or less adequately, but then some man, without looking where he was going, touched my elbow, and I spilled the contents of the plate that I was holding in one hand. "Oh, salsa spilled on my shirt." "Oh, Jim," my wife reproached me. She quickly sat down and began to wipe the stain from the carpet. "It will leave stains. Don't step in it." "I didn't move," I answered. "I can understand why your name isn't Grace," Phil jokes. I rolled my eyes and Ellie grabbed my arm. "Come on, we need to clean your shirt." "I can handle it myself," I said, blotting the stain with a napkin that I managed to grab. "This is silk," she retorted, continuing to pull me into the kitchen. But we didn't stop there and went through the back door into the utility room around the corner, which I had never gone into before. "Take off your shirt," she said sharply. "I don't understand why you're angry. It was an accident. This guy bumped into me himself." "You could step aside," she said, opening the top cabinet, looking inside for a few moments, then grabbing a bottle of shout stain remover. She started cleaning the stain in the sink. Now I had to spend the rest of the evening in a wet shirt. God forbid you suggest leaving early. I sighed. This was something that haunted our marriage from the very beginning. She loved me, but always thought I was a little clumsy. I think this has to do with my technical background. I showered regularly, didn't stare at cleavage, and never went to a Star Trek convention. But I had strange hobbies and even stranger friends. At least, they seemed strange to a girl who was closer to social life than to gatherings in her parents' basement. You might think she was cold when we got home, and you'd be half right. On the way home, I received the standard analysis of the past evening with her comments about how I embarrassed her. She considered it help in my development. I thought it was just nitpicking. But when we returned home, in the bedroom, she immediately took off her blouse. "Show me what you can do, big guy," she said in a hoarse voice. We made love. "That was amazing, Jim, but I need to clean myself up," she said. I looked at her golden buttocks, swaying on the way to our bathroom, and heard the water rustling. This was another thing I didn't like. As soon as she was done with sex, she seemed to tune out. She hadn't really appreciated the afterglow of intimacy lately. Returning from the bathroom, she stopped at her dresser and put on her nightgown. It seems that there was no need to count on a repeat batch. She tossed me a warm, damp washcloth, and then climbed into bed and turned off the light, leaving her clothes scattered on the floor. The next day, things started to get weird. Our signing party was on Friday, and I was relaxing at home. Our house was in a transitional stage between home and mansion. It was well equipped, but its cost periodically became the cause of our quarrels. Ellie wanted a house appropriate for our status, and I wanted a place that we could easily afford. Although I was making over $250,000 a year, which was good considering the company's profits, it still wasn't enough for California. However, the house itself suited me. To Ellie's credit, it was very cozy and beautifully furnished, not like the concrete boxes Andrew preferred. She did a great job with the decor and even stayed within budget, although new trinkets still appeared from time to time. I was sitting in my natural wood-paneled office and had just finished writing a piece of code when I heard the notification sound of a new email. Opening my email, I saw a message from my friend Carl. We haven't communicated since I sent him the parameters for the beta version of our new program, and I decided that he might have sent me his work. But that was not the case. The message read, "Jim, some guy came to my mother's house to talk to me about our Lia beta. Of course, I was at Sheila's, so I missed it. He said he wanted to discuss it privately. He knew the beta version number." I met Carl back in high school. We became close because my family moved to an isolated ranch house in the middle of nowhere, and the only child within a 10-mile radius was Carl, and I soon realized why. Carl had complex Tourette's syndrome. This was before Tourette's syndrome was widely talked about, definitely before any documentaries were made about it. And children, as you know, can be cruel. Carl was an angry boy, so his parents moved to a farming community. Having no other options, we were literally brought together. At first, we had our ups and downs in our relationship, but something magical happened that summer. His parents bought him a Sega Genesis. During the first week, his mother was forced to turn off the electricity so that we could somehow break away from the console. By winter, we were both working part-time jobs, collecting aluminum cans, clearing snow from driveways, and doing any other kind of work to save up for the next video game. Castlevania, Mortal Kombat, and Sonic became our constant companions. When Carl played, his tic disappeared. Carl became much less aggressive, but was never able to completely get rid of his shyness. He let me handle all the negotiations when we took on part-time jobs together, be it dog walking, lawn mowing, or some small errands. We continued to communicate even after school. Carl became an independent programmer, developing codes for various clients, especially those who did not want to deal with large companies. His problems with Tourette's syndrome and social skills made office work nearly impossible for him. I provided him with projects that I could redirect, and he completed them flawlessly. But his letter alarmed me. How could someone find out the beta version number? This data was to remain strictly confidential. I wrote to Carl. You didn't see him again? Are you sure he knew the beta number? I'll call you back later. Don't tell anyone about this, okay? It was strange, but I tried to put it aside. There was too much going on at once. However, this incident left me with a strange feeling. When I decided to go to college, Carl literally begged me to go to the same university as him and be his roommate. I agreed. We both went into computer science, inspired by our love of video games and visions of the future. Unfortunately, while in most cases the symptoms of Tourette's syndrome improve with age, this did not happen for Carl. In college, I was his roommate, confidant, and sometimes even his tutor. I had other friends that I hung out with, which made me feel guilty sometimes, but I also wanted to be in a relationship, and Carl wasn't the best companion for meeting girls. So I divided my social time between him and looking for romantic connections. In my third year, I met Ellie, and in my last year, our relationship became serious. She rarely interacted with Carl, as I tried to keep these two sides of my life separate. Apart from rare trips to the movies together, we moved in different circles. Looking back, I realized that my relationship with Ellie alienated me from Carl. I was ashamed of it, but these things happen, especially when a girl comes into your life. Ellie was always more outgoing, and we complemented each other well. She was even less picky about financial matters than I was, and I have mathematical abilities. One day, I asked her why she decided to accept my advances after we started dating. She bluntly responded that I was a package deal. A comprehensive offer? What does it mean? She looked at me with that slightly condescending look that girls have when they think you should figure it out yourself. Well, a package deal. If I knew, I wouldn't ask, right? A complex offer is what a girl needs in a guy. For most girls, it's about the same. You have to be kind, a little cute. It's bad to be too nice, because such guys often go out, but being ugly won't do either. You should be easygoing, not an asshole. A little sporty to be masculine, slightly taller than the girl, and definitely with good career prospects. These are the main points, but there are others. I blinked, dumbfounded. Isn't this too calculated? No more than you value my culinary skills, my family, and my ass, she answered honestly. That's what dating is all about, finding the right partner. Most people don't realize it, but they choose who they love. I chose you, big guy. She hugged me and kissed me so much that my head was spinning, and I thought there was no point in discussing this further. We got married expecting a happy future ahead of us. But then the internet bubble burst. We were both struggling to find work, me doing data entry and her working retail to make ends meet. When we moved to California, we found ourselves isolated from most of our old friends. About 6 years after graduating from college, I met Carl again when I attended my father's funeral. Having arranged all the necessary things, I saw him in a red uniform in the Pizza Hut kitchen. Frankly, I was shocked and extended my trip by one day to talk to him. He was still looking for a good job, but since the competition was huge and he had social difficulties and lacked experience, he did odd jobs. We were just starting our business, and I had more code than I could handle myself, so I offered him a deal. I would send him tasks, and he would work for me in his spare time for free. I know what you're thinking. I'm an asshole. But our business was short of funds, and I couldn't afford to pay him. However, our company was real, and he could at least show the work on his resume when he looked for a new position. And to be fair, his skills might not be good enough to get the job done, and working for me would give him time to hone them in a real-life environment. If he proved himself and we became successful, I could pay him. So the benefit was mutual. In the end, he agreed, improved his skills enough to become part of our team, and for the last 3 years I gave him some of the tasks and paid him a standard salary. The only catch was that he worked from home in Ohio, not Silicon Valley. He never met other employees, and I was the only one he interacted with in person. Who contacted him? In the software industry, despite the friendly atmosphere, there are plenty of cases of talent and ideas being poached. Just remember the story of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. Someone found Carl and contacted him. But how did they know that Carl, from the Ohio boondocks, was developing software for a California company preparing for an IPO, and, more importantly, doing it successfully? I thought about this for a long time. On the one hand, I was happy for him. He has come a long way from a pizza delivery man to the person they want to lure away. On the other hand, I was worried that someone knew about his existence. As far as I knew, only our company knew about Carl, and I was his only point of contact. This did not mean that no one in our company except me knew about the person who writes code for us. But only I and the HR department had access to his personal data. So someone leaked the information, or another company went to great lengths to track down Carl Gretzler across the country. I sighed and put the thought aside for later. It might be worth asking HR some tough questions, but I was happy for Carl. He didn't often get the chance to feel appreciated. I didn't think he would agree to leave. He liked his life, a girl, a well-paid job, and closeness to his mother. What if he left for another company? I thought about it. It would be unpleasant, but for him it would be for the best. Since he met Sheila, I have ceased to be his only friend. He should take care of himself, and I would be happy for him. I looked at the screen and thought. Then he started typing. Have you sent out your resume? How did they find you? I don't understand anything. How did they find out about our LIA? And are you sure about the beta number? Developers often discuss their projects, but it's one thing to talk about software versions and another to try to steal code. I was sure that Carl would not have done this, especially since he himself warned me. I needed to check if anyone was trying to steal our developments. But what really alarmed me was how they found out where Carl lived before. This was a wake-up call. Could someone simply check our university's alumni lists and connect me with other people on our corporate board? It was worth thinking about. The rest of the weekend was pretty boring. I stayed home and turned on Lord of the Rings as background noise for work. Arlaye, yes, I love Lovecraft, Sumi. Andrew made me promise that I could name the company's projects, but not their market names. Bohr was our latest version of software for protecting high-speed network routers. It wasn't something radically new, like Windows or a new operating system, but it improved speed and allowed older systems to run faster, which marketers considered a goldmine. It's better to spend tens of thousands of dollars on new software than hundreds of thousands on upgrading hardware. It was a temporary solution, but don't many businesses use such approaches? Ellie walked into the room, looked at the TV, and sighed. How many times have you watched this already? She asked. I lost count. I like to have something playing in the background while I'm working, I answered without looking up from the computer. You need to watch new films. Stay informed. Not this fantasy nonsense. I looked at her. This has become a recurring theme lately. If I remember correctly, when I took you to these films a couple of years ago, you said they were amazing. She pouted slightly. Yes, but then it was new, fashionable, and no one laughed at it. And now it has become some strange hobby of nerds. I sighed. Honey, this is a classic. These films will go down in history as one of the best film trilogies of our time. And I like other films too, I just prefer these sometimes. Oh, of course. For example, The Hunt for Red October, Metropolis, and The Wrath of Khan. Do you see? These are all classics. They have stood the test of time, like those muscle cars. What are they called? With a horse on the emblem. I faked it. Ellie loved these cars. Mustang, she exclaimed enthusiastically. I wish you were cool enough to buy yourself a Mustang, she muttered. Why not? Because I already have a good car. Maybe when I change it, I answered evasively. I thought about it. I now had enough money to buy a cool car like a Mustang, and that would make Ellie happy. She always raved about the cool toys our friends owned. The problem was that I wanted a car that could comfortably seat more than two people. Like if we ever had children, although that seemed less and less likely. The next day, everything was hectic. We had just entered the stock exchange, and many employees simply could not take their eyes off the stock quotes. The atmosphere in the office was mixed. Those who chose a stable salary and a standard pension plan tried to hide their disappointment, while stock owners were either over the moon or showed resignation, clumsily hiding satisfied smiles. I could determine the position of our actions by the sounds in the room. On average, cheers outweighed groans 2 to 1. I tried not to give in to this general excitement. We still had work to do. We had to write code, serve clients. It was easy to get carried away by the quick money, but it only came through hard work. Without a good product or quality service, we risked becoming another example of failure. However, I still couldn't completely ignore what was happening. A quick calculation in my head showed that my net worth had just increased by $5,000. Okay, I admit it, I'm no saint. I was about to get back to work on RLIA when the beep sounded a new email. My email client used the same sound for all notifications, and I immediately remembered Saturday. After checking my email, I didn't find any strange code downloads or any security issues with the VPN Carl and I were using to communicate. Everything looked fine, but there was still no answer from Carl. I sent him another email asking for progress on his piece of code and again asking him to tell me about the person who found it. I got home late that night and Ellie had already gone to bed in a foul mood. I understood this by the fact that she did not even turn to me, did not hug me, as she usually did, throwing her hand on my chest. Lately, she has often been unhappy. I felt guilty about my late returns. The workday started as usual. Employees continued to monitor the stock. I joked with irritation that I would block access to financial sites. Jared, one of our programmers, chuckled. How long do you think it will take a group of programmers to bypass your blocking? The others laughed, and William showed me his iPhone and brazenly stuck out his tongue. Great, I grinned. Now you so-called internet millionaires have twice as many reasons to work overtime without pay like I do. This caused groans from shareholders and malicious laughter from those who did not have them. When I entered my office, Hector, my deputy for programming, was waiting for me. He sat on a chair in front of my desk and studied the room. My assistant Mandy warned me about his visit in advance. Hector, I greeted, looking at him in slight surprise. What's happened? Can you look at the routines of Multiplexer 5.05? It seems to me that these guys can't cope, he asked nervously. I thought about it. This is Reg and Ryan's responsibility, I frowned. They seem to be competent. What's wrong? He began to describe the problem. And I would like you to check their source code for errors. At the last stage, we had no problems with this module. Well, now there is. Okay, I agreed. I'll take a look. Hector continued to stand, waiting for something else. I looked at him. I said I'll sort it out. This is all? He seemed to have woken up. Yes, I think that's it, he answered with disappointment. Okay. Why don't you try to find out exactly where the problem is so I don't have to look through thousands of lines of code? You are their leader. He froze with a blank look. Okay, boss, he said softly and left. The next day, there were even more problems. Andrew asked me to do an interview about our company, so I spent the morning doing it. The guy who interviewed me was very young, with a face covered in acne, but he asked good questions, although he knew less about business than I did. Towards the end of the interview, I asked, "What publication do you work for?" Hoping to find out which trade magazine is hiring such young professionals. Oh, I run a technology blog, which is quite popular. Last year, I had 20,000 visits, he answered proudly. I wanted to fly out of there like a bullet, but I tried to be polite and finish as quickly as possible. After all, this young guy did not make the appointment himself. At lunch, I had a couple of strong cocktails to calm down. Andrew was clearly going too far with this PR activity or was just making fun of me. But I've had enough of this. After all, this is his job. Having calmed down a little after drinking, I returned to work and decided to work on the code, which, according to Hector, didn't work. I spent about 2 hours looking through the details, but realized that I had reached a dead end. Then I started checking the correspondence history. 2 weeks ago, this module was already approved as functioning. I tried to find the confirmation letter, but couldn't. It was strange because I remembered exactly what it was. That evening, when I came home early for the first time in a long time, things got even worse. I received a letter from Carl. It read, WVZ, FBLGB or FB Inger TRGGVAT ONX GBLBH. Berwin when VQWQN GRX RAC GUVAT. LBH TBG and Boyas. FBZR SHPXRE VF NFX VAT ZR UBJ SNE VR TBG GRA JVGU Ellie RU NKA versus VJNF TZBFG SVA Fuck. RZARJ QRGN WIF GUNG Junior QVF PHFFRQ INFIGURRX. JGS, UBJQVQR SWAG ZR. It took me a few seconds to realize what he had done. I opened a translator for the ROT 13 cipher. This is a simple encoding method where each letter is replaced by the one that goes through 13 positions in the alphabet. A becomes N, B becomes O, and so on. When I decrypted the message, it read, Jim, sorry for answering so late. Sheila and I were away for the weekend. You're in trouble. Some guy asks me how far I've gotten with Arlaye and if I'm almost done. He knows the details we discussed last week. What the? How did he find me? An unpleasant feeling began to stir in my stomach. 6 months ago, while I was visiting my mother, I met a plump young woman named Sheila on a flight to Columbus. She was reading a book about the neurological problems of Tourette's syndrome. We got to talking. Her younger brother suffered from this disease, and she was studying medicine. I mentioned my friend Carl, who was a rare case where the symptoms did not improve with age. She wanted to meet him to study. She soon wanted to study him more closely, and 2 months ago he moved in with her. Since then, Carl has been happier than ever. His work suffered, but I cut him some slack. I'm not a saint myself, so I understood. But a problem arose. The HR department only listed his old address, where he lived with his mother. The only place where his new address was written down was my diary at home. I wanted to write Carl an answer right away, but I stopped. Carl was smart. He wrote in code because he believed that our correspondence could be read by strangers. Our VPN used strong encryption to protect data, but this only applied to external threats. If anyone actually knew what we discussed last week, then the problem was internal. I opened my diary. There, in black and white, was Carl's address marked old, and next to it was Sheila's address. I made this note weeks ago and didn't even think about passing it on to HR. One of those tasks that you put off because of more urgent matters. My feeling of anxiety intensified. Was someone in my house? I thought about all the people who came and went. Of course, Ellie, Swati, our housekeeper, all Ellie's friends who came to us. Casual workers. Have we done any work lately? I tried to keep up with modern social engineering techniques, and of course, we had a good security system, but so many people came into the house. Heck, we had a pool guy, a lawnmower guy, and a pest control guy from Terminix, just to name a few, and what else could have been left behind or inspected? At that moment, I thought that I could handle it myself. But the problem grew, and although I was good at managing staff, writing code, balancing a balance sheet, and even choosing a couple of stocks to invest in, I was not good at political issues. And security and the ability to read people is, without a doubt, politics. And for political issues, I needed to see Andrew. I looked into the kitchen looking for Ellie. She wasn't there, but on the table next to the microwave were cooling boxes of Chinese food and a note saying she was going to a spin class. It turns out that there is a new trend training for a simulated ascent of Mount Everest, and Ellie has been training hard to try it out when the event comes to our city. Well, at least it saved me the awkward conversation of asking her which of her friends had been snooping around my office, at least until Andy gave me some tips, and I really didn't want to believe that it could be Swati. She was with us for 2 years, and, in my opinion, was simply a saint, although Ellie had her own complaints. I think it was some kind of female territorial war. I sighed, got into the car, and drove to Andy's. 2 hours later, I returned to the kitchen. With a dissatisfied look, I looked at the boxes of food, now ice cold, and put them in the refrigerator. When I finished, I must have stood there for a few minutes, lost in thought. Finally, I made a decision and went to the top shelf of the pantry where we kept extra bottles of liquor. Sure, we probably had an open bottle of whiskey in my huge Globe bar that I simply had to buy from Sky Mall magazine after one of my many business trips, but right now my mind was elsewhere. I cracked open a new bottle, poured some into a glass with ice, and plopped down in the breakfast nook. So that's how she knew where the cleaning product was. Mechanically, I picked up the phone and pressed the speed dial button. Hello? It's Jim, the bastard. Tell her not to come home. There's no room for her here anymore. I hung up without waiting for an answer. 5 minutes later, the phone rang, signaling a new era in my life. I didn't bother to call ahead. Let's call it social awkwardness, which sometimes pays off. I was trying to take it all in as I pulled up to Andy's house. The list of suspects was long. As I said, it was a mission-style house with lots of glass windows front and back overlooking the valley. I got out of the car and headed to the front door. Night had already fallen, and the light burned brightly inside. Through the side window, next to the carved oak double door, I saw golden hair and a glimpse of a female figure disappearing around the corner. I stopped and smiled, forgetting my original intentions. I wish I could justify my actions, but I can't. I wanted to look at the next conquest that Andrew was now with. He had had quite a few great girlfriends, as he called them in the past, and apparently this woman was walking around his house completely naked. So I snuck to the backyard. I'm not perfect, I admit it. I'm a living man. I wanted to take a sneak peek and decide if it was worth bothering him. I walked around the paved path set among the white gravel and looked through the large glass window on the side. She stood at the bar in all her naked glory, the light inside casting a golden glow on her skin. She looked over her shoulder, looking flirtatious, and placed her hands on the top shelves, arching her back and rising on her tiptoes. Her bottom was on display. It was Ellie. She didn't climb Everest today. There was movement to the left and Andrew came into view, approaching her. I felt numb and numb. What is this? Error? A fleeting romance? Please, God, let this be blackmail. She still looked beautiful, but I didn't feel excited looking at her. I saw their lips move. He was saying something. She shook her head, but smiled. Then she bit her lip and tilted her head in a gesture I knew when she was thinking about something, and then answered him. He went upstairs. While he was gone, she went to her purse, which lay next to a pile of clothes, took out a stack of papers, and ran her eyes over them. She read in silence, then suddenly raised her head, put them back, and lazily returned to the shelves. At that moment, some ounce of common sense returned to my head, and I took out my iPhone to start recording. I needed proof. For something. My mind had not yet decided why, but my inner nerd wanted to record what was happening, even despite the anger and shame overwhelming me. He returned, and they had sex. At this point, I had seen enough, and, in a state of stupor, went to my car. I don't remember how I got home. The next morning, Swati walked in and noticed an empty bottle of whiskey lying on the kitchen table. On the way, she had already seen my car parked haphazardly at an angle in the driveway, and with a worried look she looked at me, sitting in a robe and boxers, devouring a reheated plate of pork and noodles for breakfast at 10 in the morning. "How are you, Mr. Reynolds?" she asked in her sing-song voice. "Hello, Swati," I answered gloomily. "Are you sick, Mr. Reynolds?" She looked around. Usually I was at work, and we saw her only in the evening. She was a roughly 50-year-old Hindu woman, an illegal immigrant whom we hired to clean. I know in California we had to hire Mexicans, but Ellie thought that was an avant-garde approach. "No, I'm not sick." "Ah." She put down her bag and lunchbox and walked through the kitchen into the living room. There, she undoubtedly saw the blinking light on the answering machine with dozens of messages and a stack of upside-down photographs of Ellie stacked in the corner. "Has Mrs. Reynolds left?" she asked innocently. "Yes," I said sadly. For some reason, he added, "forever." She thought about it. "Okay," she finally said, shaking her head from side to side with her usual gesture. And it basically told me everything I needed to know about my marriage. I didn't go to work that day. This was uncharted territory for me. No one gets married with the thought of divorce. Well, we don't do that in Ohio. California may be a different matter. How to share 10 years of marriage. How to deal with money. The phone rang every half hour. I looked at the caller ID every time. If she called, I didn't answer. If one of her many friends called, I did not answer. If that bastard called, I didn't answer. If the number was unknown, I didn't answer either. In short, I didn't answer at all. She never showed up that day. I had mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, if I saw her, I would want to strangle her for her blatant disrespect. On the other hand, I would like her to at least try to come home and fix something. I wish I could say I was determined, focused, and in control, but I wasn't. Swati cleared away the trash and went about her business, which involved equal parts cleaning and loud phone conversations in Hindi. Most likely, she was discussing the latest news from the lives of her employers. At least she seemed to be in a good mood. I wandered around the house. Last night, I took many pictures. It turned out to be a decent stack. I used to be proud of her beauty, but now I couldn't even look at her, not even in photographs. I thought about breaking them all or burning our large wedding album, but I calmed down and decided that I always had lighter fluid and could only burn it once. Every now and then I looked for family consultants, then looked at the websites of divorce lawyers, then looked at the services of carriers, and even looked for killers and wholesale suppliers of alcohol, while my emotions rushed from side to side. For lunch, Swati cooked me some food and brought me a glass of iced tea, which I appreciated since I learned that Hindus consider chili peppers to be vegetables, not spices. It was spicy but tasty. It was a caring gesture, and I accepted it. She came in from time to check. By the end of the day, I was immersed in a game on my Xbox. I needed to switch off and let my thoughts settle. This is how it works for programmers. 2 days of inactivity and then 36 hours of code in a row, fueled by a creative impulse, and in my case, iced tea. Now I was in waiting mode. I felt lonely and cold in my bed. It wasn't that she wasn't there, it was that it could have been forever. I still didn't want to see her. These images would not leave my head. I recognized those quick, jerky kisses from our past. And although she always denied me her forbidden, that night she presented this consolation prize to someone else. I wondered if I even knew who she was. Is it possible to ever truly know someone? The next morning I called work and told Mandy I would be back later. She, the cheater, appeared around noon. Swati, God be her judge, heard the sound of the key in the lock and rushed to the door. "Who's there?" she asked. My wife looked up, holding the key in the lock of the suddenly opened door. "It's me, Swati," she said briefly. "Oh, hello, Mr. Reynolds. Miss Ellie has come to see you." My wife, who had already begun to push past Swati, stopped, keeping her expression unreadable. Swati always called her Mrs. Reynolds for 2 years. Little did she know that she had just earned herself a very generous bonus. My wife turned to her. "Swati, this is my home, and I don't need you to introduce me. I live here." "Whatever you say, Miss Ellie. Can I take you to the living room?" "No, no need." She confidently walked further down the corridor, throwing her purse on the table, as always. She looked up and saw me standing right in front of her with a frown on my face. She shuddered and took a step back. "Ellie," I said dryly, "no greeting. I told you not to come. This is still my home gym, and we have a lot to discuss." "I think there's a lot that should have been talked about earlier. You seem to have taken it all very easily." And she really looked like everything was fine. Well made up, wearing clothes I had never seen her wear before. I wondered if she bought them yesterday or if she had them at Andrew's house. Yesterday was hard, but I managed. "Makeup helps," she said with a small wry smile. We naturally moved into the living room. I sat in the single chair as I didn't want to sit next to her. "Is this the same conversation where you say it was an accidental mistake, that it's just sex and it won't happen again?" She hesitated and looked at her hands. "No. This is the conversation where I ask for a divorce. Do you really think I'm stupid enough to risk our marriage for some fling? Well, it's no wonder you recovered so quickly. You already had my substitute ready, and it seems that you decided to test him in action, or was that a long time ago? Have you always cheated on me behind my back? Her face became extremely tense. Can I? She began, but fell silent. Swati, bring me a glass of white wine. Do you want anything? She turned to me. No, we have a hemlock cocktail if you prefer. There was not a sound in the kitchen. Swati, she repeated, louder. Silence. What's wrong with her? She asked, standing up and heading to the kitchen. Moral principles, character. I threw after her. She gave me a dissatisfied look. As soon as she turned away, I went to her purse. That night, she looked at some papers during sex. Women, of course, are capable of multitasking, but during sex. This could only mean one thing: papers mattered. Inside, I found not one, but two sets of documents. One is a declaration of divorce with our names on it. The other, to my surprise, was a legal document on the Ipswich letterhead. I was skimming the first line when the doorbell rang. I looked through the window and saw a man in a cheap suit with a stack of papers in his hands. I grabbed the documents and walked out through the kitchen. As I walked past, Ellie tried to grab my hand. Jim, where are you going? Swati, open the door. She threw towards the Indian woman sitting in the corner. Swati, who once again deserved the award, simply sat and drank her tea. She knew who was paying for her rice, or whatever they say in India. Jim, we need to talk. You can't run away. Swati, I shook off her hand, opened the garage door, and got into the car. Ellie gave up trying to hold me back and ran to the front door. I pressed the garage door opener and started to drive out, crouching down so that the man with the papers couldn't see my face. You see, I was remembering the movie To Serve Sarah, the stupid romantic comedy Ellie, and I watched back when we didn't have much money. The gist of the film was that timely service of divorce papers was critical for both parties. The fact was that in 2 years our neighborhood had never had a stranger knock on the door. Only friends, co-workers, or relatives. So the appearance of an unknown person at the moment when Ellie was at home immediately alerted me. And of course, the fact that the second document contained a power of attorney to transfer its voting shares to Andrew only strengthened my suspicions. The problem was that she had no shares. I had them, or rather, with us. Something told me she was going to change that. I guess I should have been glad that she didn't decide to kill me. It's ironic that she chose this film. Until this moment, I had not connected my problems with Carl and the Arlaye leak to the fact that my wife was cheating on me with my business partner. But now there was some kind of symmetrical pattern to it. Ellie had full access to my notes to track the progress of our new software version. Dozens of seemingly innocent questions in recent weeks suddenly became so. The program was almost ready, and I guess they were waiting until it was over to strike. They were just unlucky I received a warning before all this hit me. But what should I do? I noticed that I automatically went to work. I pulled into my parking space and saw Hector's convertible there. It worked quickly. Some more things started to clear up in my head. I parked in Andrew's spot as he seemed to enjoy sharing without asking permission. I had no idea if the bailiff was watching me or if there was another one somewhere nearby, so I hurried towards the main entrance, slowing only long enough to run the key along Hector's door and punch a hole in the fabric roof just above the driver's seat. I tried to resist, but I couldn't. The thought that Hector was involved in this right down to the roots of his thinning hair haunted me. I walked past security and George picked up the phone, but didn't try to stop me. When two company owners fight, it's hard to choose a side. I took advantage of this and headed up the stairs to my floor. When I entered the work area, the atmosphere changed. Conversations suddenly died down. The rhythm of typing on keyboards slowed. Mandy stood there. When she saw me, she waved a piece of paper in front of my face. "What kind of nonsense is this?" she asked. "Later, Mandy," I replied. "Hector is in your office," she shouted after me. Inside, Hector was removing one of my diploma frames from the wall and putting it in a box. I thought I told you not to. I grabbed it. While dragging Judas out of my office, I grabbed his diploma and then pushed him. I threw his diploma at him like a projectile. Mandy froze, holding a piece of paper in her hands and her mouth wide open. "Don't connect me with anyone, dear," I said calmly. She nodded, dumbfounded. I returned to the office for a moment, but found it necessary to throw the box of junk directly onto the still kneeling Hector. There was the sound of glass and electronics clinking. Then I clicked the lock on the door and closed the curtains. Muffled voices could be heard from outside. Until now, I had acted automatically, but it was time to start thinking. I'm sure the bastard and the call woman made their plan. Surely they spent the little time that they did not spend on bed pleasures to move forward with the divorce and the bailiffs. Sitting there, I tried to log into the computer. An error message has appeared. I tried again, typing the password more slowly. Another failure. If you try again, the system will lock. That piece of shit Hector, who also had admin access, removed my password. Choking him would be too gentle. But of course, being a computer professional, I provided a workaround. Simple, so as not to forget. What did he sound like? While I was remembering what to do with the computer, my thoughts turned to stocks. She probably procured a proxy card to transfer the share votes to Andrew. The four founders owned half the company, and much of the venture capital was non-voting. Assuming we retained 2/3 of the voting shares, how could she get them? Did you buy it? No. Most likely, the divorce decree required that she get half of my shares. I heard a knock on the door. "Jim, this is Gordon. Can we talk?" Gordon was the one I worked closest with. I went to the door. "Gordon, are you alone?" "What?" "Listen, open the door. Let's talk." I thought, do you even know what that son of a bitch and that traitor did? "Listen, Jim, I understand it's not nice," he began, "but you can't let your personal life ruin our business." "Do you even understand what you're talking about?" I interrupted him. "They set me up and are trying to steal my company, and you tell me to swallow everything and deal with it." "This is as much my company as yours," he shouted, "and I won't let you ruin our chance to enter a major market because of a woman." A woman's sigh came from outside. Probably one of our programmers heard this. I was silent for a few seconds. "Jim," he said, a little calmer. "Yes, I'm here. First of all, this woman was my wife, and I'm not the one who decided to risk company for sex. I'm the victim here. If you want to blame someone, blame them." His voice became more conciliatory. "I understand. Why don't you come out and we can talk about this?" An unfamiliar voice added, "Are you his boss? Because if so, then I can give it to you." "Go to hell, Gordon," I shouted. I know, not the most original, but the day was clearly not going well. What should I do? If I walk out the door, they will hand me the papers, and they will have control of the company. But I couldn't stay here forever. Security has keys to all the doors, so it's only a matter of time. And honestly, how could I possibly work with these people after what they did? My pride would not allow me to come to terms with this, and seeing Andrew's smug face every day would be torture for me, no matter what the dividends or profits were. The door handle jerked. "Hey, stop it," he said. "No calls," Mandy screamed. The twitching stopped. Okay, I was backed into a corner. One way or another, I will lose my share in the company. A vague idea came to mind. In California, this creature will still receive a significant part of my assets. But I didn't want Andrew or Ellie to profit from my work. They didn't deserve it. How can I get out? I took my iPhone and dialed the number I found earlier. "Hello? Hi, Randy. My name is Jim Reynolds. I need to place an order." "Yes, sir," responded a very young voice on the other end of the line. "I want to sell approximately 1 million shares of Ipswich Inc. My account number is 5,467,692. That's a lot of shares, sir. In fact, there was a clatter of keys. These are all your shares." "Exactly. I want to sell them." "Sir, this is an IPO stock. It has huge growth potential." He began, trying to give me good advice. "I know. Just sell. calculate your commission. 2 minutes later, my iPhone beeped to confirm. 3 minutes later, a woman's scream was heard outside and the jangling of keys in my door. A nasty-looking man in a cheap suit walked in, followed by two disgruntled guards and Mandy rubbing her thigh. They all watched as I stood smiling next to the bailiff, pointing at my watch while Mandy recorded it on my iPhone. The others in the room looked at each other in confusion while I enjoyed the moment. I finally had confidence that I had taken the right step. Let Andrew, Ellie, and their gang deal with the consequences. I opened my eyes on Friday morning and saw a very young Indian girl with a tray in my bedroom. Morph HRRM, I muttered, still half asleep. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds. Here's your breakfast," she answered cheerfully. "This is wonderful. Who are you?" "I am pretty." I nodded as if this explained something to me. I looked at the tray. The only thing I learned was coffee. There were some white pancakes and something reddish nearby. "Thank you, Pratty. What is this?" "This is breakfast." "Yes, but what exactly is for breakfast?" "Morning meal, silly," she giggled. I left it. This was not the time to sort things out. "What are you doing here?" "There's a teachers' conference today, and Grandma is looking after me." "Is this nothing?" "Well, welcome. Do we have anything familiar to eat?" I asked, carefully taking a bite of the pancake. She giggled again. "I'll talk to Grandma. She doesn't cook American food very well." She grabbed one of the pancakes, dipped it in red, and ate it with pleasure. "It's a sin to leave food," she said defiantly. "Well, enjoy it. You're not allowed coffee." I spent the day trying to find a good divorce lawyer. Believe me, I haven't trusted any of our corporate lawyers since Harry. This proxy document had to come from somewhere. Have you ever tried to call a lawyer? This is a real test. After several hours of playing cat and mouse on the phone, I managed to talk to my friend Judith. I explained the situation to her, and she was sympathetic for a while, but quickly got to the point. "Do you need a lamb, a pit bull, or a fox?" "Excuse me, who?" I was surprised. "It's simple. The lamb tries to solve everything quickly, makes compromises, and avoids conflicts. They're fine if you want a quiet divorce, but that's not your case, right?" "Definitely not." "Continue." "Fine. A pit bull is someone who wants to fight. If you want the other party to suffer, that's your choice." She paused, as if she was not saying something. "Yes," I pushed. "But if you choose a pit bull, be prepared to suffer yourself. They live by struggle, and for them, this is the only method. You hire them if the other party is afraid of blood." "What about the fox?" I asked, interested. I never realized that lawyers have such different tactics. Lisa looks at the situation as a whole. She does not fight if the issue can be resolved with a kind word. A pit bull will fight to the end, even if the fight is futile. The fox is looking for different approaches, including fighting. Sounds like the best option, right? So you might think. But the problem is that foxes are rare, and sometimes they outplay themselves. They are not as cooperative as lambs and not as aggressive as pit bulls. But if you need something complex, they are best. I thought about all the possible scenarios for the upcoming divorce. I don't think I have a choice. Need a fox. This will definitely be a messy business. There is something else. Foxes are the bimbo of the legal profession, she added. "Sorry?" I asked, confused. "Beautiful blondes with big breasts. Very popular, so they choose the clients they want. I'll give you a couple of names, but then you can handle it yourself." "I'll try," I said, feeling that it would not be easy. As it turned out, Roland K. Thurman, an attorney, was happy to accept my case. One of his clients suddenly died of a heart attack, and he just had some free time. The legal business is a strange thing. We met and had a long conversation. He gave me a lot of homework. When I returned home around 4, Swati met me at the door. Pratty stood nearby, looking awkward. "Mr. Reynolds, Miss Ellie came with a man and stole things," said Swati. "Stole it? What exactly?" "Clothes, decorations, your laptop." I rushed into the office in a panic. My laptop was still in my bag on the table. "He is here, Swati." No, that pink one. Ah, it's hers. She's a cheater. She's not supposed to take the dowry, she replied indignantly. I sighed. If this is the worst thing that happened. You need to change the locks, she said sternly. Castles? Then call a locksmith. I'll leave it to you, I said. She continued to stand still and look at me. What? I need money. Oh, yes. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a couple $100 and handed it to her. She patted me gently on the shoulder. Don't worry, Mr. Reynolds. Everything will be all right. Smells and sounds came from the kitchen, where the radio was playing loudly, singing a song in a woman's voice in a language unknown to me. I looked into the kitchen and saw another Indian woman standing among many pots and pans that gave off a complex mixture of aromas. Hello, Mr. Reynolds, she greeted me joyfully. Hello. My life became less and less clear every day. Swati appeared behind me again. Mr. Reynolds, the phone has been ringing all day. Did you answer? No, Mr. Reynolds. Mr. Andrew was. Surly, her tone made it clear exactly how unpleasant she found him. From the expression on his face, one could guess that for her he was worse than mud on shoes. I completely agreed with her. I went to my office to check my messages. I had not been there even a minute when Pratty appeared with a tray with a glass of iced tea on it. Here's your tea, Mr. Reynolds. Thank you, Pratty, but I would like something stronger. Do you want to brew your tea stronger, Mr. Reynolds? She asked with a naivety that made me doubt my words. The idea of getting drunk in front of a child seemed very bad to me, so I waved my hand. Doesn't matter. Who's that in the kitchen? This is the cook you wanted, Mr. Reynolds. Cook? Since when do I have a chef? You said you wanted American food, so Grandma brought Tripty, she explained, as if it was completely natural. I never told you to hire. I trailed off because the smell from the kitchen was really appetizing. We'll discuss this later. I turned on the answering machine to listen to messages. Andrew's voice came out of the speaker. You bastard, what have you done? The underwriters are calling, and they are unhappy, you bastard. I told you that you shouldn't sell shares until I give the go-ahead. Call me back immediately. We need to settle this matter. Beep. This is already the second message, you bastard. I know I slept with her, but that's no reason to do that. You should call me right now. They start getting angry and want to know why the hell you broke the sales ban. You signed the documents, and now you're doing this. We need to fix this before the end of the trading day Eastern Time. What should I tell them? Beep. Maybe you should tell them you slept with my wife, asshole, I muttered. Pratty stood nearby, hiding a smile. Sorry, Pratty. Don't tell this to your grandmother. I heard worse at school, she waved it off. Here's your tea, and handed me another glass. I went back to listening to messages while taking sips of tea. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Time. Why is your phone turned off? Because I don't want to talk to you, asshole. I thought, at the same time, noting that I needed to watch my language. They're talking about bringing in lawyers. Is this some kind of stupid revenge of yours? It sounded like Andrew was having a terrible day, and I was getting better. True, I didn't quite understand what kind of ban on sales he was referring to, but judging by his hysteria, the situation was clearly causing him a lot of problems. I was about to log into the computer to understand the term when I heard a noise from the hallway. Mr. Reynolds, someone has come to see you, Swati said in a tone that was difficult to interpret. I walked out into the hallway and saw Mandy with a gloomy expression on her face. Hello, Mandy. What's happened? First of all, you can tell your thug that I'm not a woman of easy virtue. And secondly, I was fired, she blurted out, looking at me angrily. Bruiser? I looked out the door and saw an Indian in a turban and a mustache. He raised his hand to his forehead in a gesture of greeting. Is this Mr. Singh? I asked Swati. Yes, this is Mr. Singh. He offered to look after the house until my cousin fixed the locks, she explained calmly, as if it was the most ordinary thing. When can your cousin fix the locks? I clarified. When he is released from prison. Well, of course. How else? I turned to Mandy, who was still standing in the hallway. Confusion was written on her face. Let's go talk to the office, I suggested. Is Miss staying for dinner? Swati asked with an emphatically neutral tone. I glanced at Mandy, and she shrugged and then nodded briefly. Yes. Swati loudly shouted something in Hindi towards the kitchen, from which a response immediately followed in a raised voice. At that moment, I gently took Mandy by the elbow, guiding her towards the office. Would you like a drink, madam? Asked Pratty, who appeared out of nowhere. Mandy shook her head and looked at me. Tell me honestly, how many people work for you? One, I think, I answered, shrugging uncertainty. She raised an eyebrow and looked even more skeptical. You are sure? I was beginning to doubt my own sanity, so I decided to change the subject. So, what happened after security took me out of the building? Mandy smiled slightly. I can't believe you did this to Hector. It was great. Anyway, Mr. Schwartz yelled at me a little. Then he officially announced that Hector is heading the department because, you see, you have personal problems. When asked what this meant, he hinted that you were on the verge of a breakdown due to stress. She rolled her eyes. I don't know where he could have gotten it from. So what's really going on? It's simple. I caught Ellie and Andrew cheating, I said, trying to keep my voice level. They tried to ambush me with a divorce so Ellie would get half of my voting shares and give them to Andrew. So this is what happened in the office. The bailiff was about to serve me with documents, and Hector seemed to know about this in advance. That bastard! Her eyes sparkled, and she brushed her brown hair out of her face. Somewhere in the house, a distant cackling sound was heard. Which one? She tilted her head. Of course, I have a lot of choices. Did she really do this to you? Poor thing, she said sympathetically. What will you do now? I couldn't help but grin. I don't think everything will go as they planned. But it looks like I'm going to get a divorce. A grimace appeared on my face. It was a tough couple of days. She grabbed my hand and looked at me with sincere sympathy. It was mean, and you didn't deserve it. I'm sorry I came here to yell at you. My problems are simply insignificant compared to this. Can you at least give me a good recommendation? Certainly. Hesitating, I asked the following question. How did the staff take it? Now it was her turn to shut up. Nobody understands what is happening. The joy of the company going public has completely disappeared. All we know is that you attacked Hector, and Andrew is acting like you're already gone. Today was full of shouting, and all the big bosses, Mr. Jenkins, Loeb, and Schwartz, had been conferring all day. Greta, Schwartz's secretary, told me about this. For some reason, they don't like you. I can't contain my delight, I answered dryly. She continued. Nobody is happy. But they need to work, you know. The economy is very bad now. It was so great to work for a company that was thriving. Hopefully still thriving. What's next? What do you mean? I mean you. Company. She looked at me, studying me carefully. Well, I've already been sent divorce papers, and I'm not going to work with Andrew. And since I don't see him leaving, I guess that means I'm leaving. As far as the company is concerned, this is no longer my problem. Can you handle it? I sighed and nodded. You know what? This is a scam. They happen all the time. I'm not sick. I am still the same programmer who can find a new job, and I have already managed to earn a considerable amount from the company. It hurts and I hate them both, but life goes on. I would love to get drunk, but Preeti is running around somewhere, so... It suddenly dawned on me that maybe that's why Swati brought her granddaughter here, so that I wouldn't do anything stupid. She was beautiful, but I don't think your wife is good. And she's stupid. Andrew doesn't respect her one bit and knows what kind of person she is. Mr. R.R. Reynolds, dinner. By mutual agreement, we put my marital woes aside, and I actually enjoyed my dinner. It was shrimp curry, and I had never tried anything like it before. She looked around the house and muttered a few admiring comments. The stack of photographs brought a bitter smile to her face, and we agreed to keep in touch. Since I no longer have to write code for these bastards, I changed my schedule. This meant that I was wide awake at 1 in the morning when my front door opened and a strange Indian man in overalls entered the house. He waved at me. Hello, Mr. Reynolds. Then he started changing my locks. I walked to the window, checking to see if there were federal marshals or police outside. "Are you out of prison?" I asked him. He looked at me strangely. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds." "Fine. I hope the bail wasn't too high." He looked very offended and muttered something in Hindi while working on the doors. Then he left, leaving me new keys and refusing to take money. I spent the weekend on the phone. I started by calling my mom. This turned into a long and drawn-out conversation. She offered to come to California, but I said that the house was already full of people, which required a separate explanation. She took pity on me and said a lot of harsh words to Ellie, whom she initially loved very much. We must give Ellie credit. She knew how to make a good first impression. It's just a pity that she had morals like a snake. In a way, I should have seen this coming. Her pragmatic approach to our relationship should have alerted me. But I honestly thought we had real affection and attraction. It turned out that I was only half right. I then wrote a long letter to Carl detailing what had happened. I assured him that my dismissal was not a reason for him to be fired too. Reminds him that he now has a girlfriend and he has to think about both of them. If nothing else, he should talk things over with Sheila before making any rash decisions. He added jokingly that he could take Hector's place. Swati appeared in the morning. "Swati, you don't work on weekends, do you?" I was sure that she never came when Ellie and I were alone. "You need cleaning, Mr. Reynolds." "Did Pridip fix the locks?" "Yes, I did everything. Thank you." I didn't mention that I wasn't very comfortable with the fact that a criminal was repairing my locks. "What is he doing now?" "He's back in prison." "Oh, is he participating in a labor rehabilitation program?" "Not rehabilitation. He works there." "Good job. He is a mechanic." Maybe Ellie did have a point for her criticism of my social skills. Luckily, Swati brought Preeti again, and I was able to apologize for my stupidity the night before, using her as a translator. Preeti thought it was funny. They stayed the whole weekend, including Tripti, my new cook. My Xbox and whiskey plans were ruined. But there was one unpleasant thing left. The fact is that Ellie and I had a busy social schedule, mostly on her initiative. We were due to attend the exhibition with another couple, Phil and Terry, who we met at a party just a week ago. How life has changed during this time. I got through to Terry and said straight out that Ellie and I were getting a divorce, that I had caught her cheating with our recent owner, and that, unfortunately, I would not be able to come to the opening. Yes, I was terribly embarrassed, but I was not going to embellish anything to look like a villain. We barely knew each other, so she made a few sympathetic remarks and quickly said goodbye. Monday was a new day as usual, and although I felt empty where work and marriage used to be, it was still nice to wake up late and not be responsible to anyone. My good mood lasted until 10 in the morning when there was another knock on the door. The same bailiff was standing there, only in a different cheap suit. "You have a summons again," he said, holding the envelope and looking around nervously as if expecting another psychotic secretary or photographer. "Listen, bastard, I have already received divorce papers. Or have you forgotten?" "How can I forget?" "You better read these papers and have a nice day," he answered calmly, walking away and muttering something under his breath. Probably bailiffs quickly get used to such things. I started reading the papers. It turned out that our main underwriting bank was suing me for violating the terms of the stock lockup agreement. I had just finished reading when the doorbell rang again. "Are you Mr. James Reynolds?" asked a young blonde with acne scars, looking at us with obvious concern. We had moved the picnic table into my front yard and were sitting there with Mindy and Roland, surrounded by piles of paperwork. Yes, give the subpoena to Miss Johnson, please. Let me sign." "Who filed against me now?" "This is from a certain Troy Anderson. He's asking for damages for violating the stock lock," Mindy said in a bored tone. "Are you often called to court?" the woman asked. "You have no idea," I answered honestly. "In fact, since the morning the summonses have been pouring in one after another. After the third bailiff, I called Mindy and asked Mr. Thurman to come help me sort out the cases and work on the divorce at the same time. We decided to move the whole process to fresh air. It was a very pleasant day in California. Why not take advantage of this? The woman walked away, muttering something under her breath. I seem to have caused that reaction in a lot of people. I admire your restraint, Mr. Reynolds, considering this train wreck that you have going on right now. And thanks for getting me out of the office, my lawyer said. My pleasure. Every time I think it can't get any worse, it gets worse. So I just smile and wait for it to be over. Mindy, how many subpoenas do we already have? Mindy picked up her notebook, biting her bottom lip as she did the math in her head. 8 from the underwriters, 3 from Ipswich, 1 for damaging property, 1 for creating a hostile work environment, and 1 for acting in a way that is detrimental to the company and in violation of your obligations as a member of the board of directors. Also, a civil suit from Hector and 1 summons from your ex-wife to freeze the transfer of joint property. A little late, to be honest. 13 in total. When a company goes public, it goes to a bank to sell shares. This makes the bank much more efficient than we could do on our own. We don't teach them how to fix computer routers, and they don't teach us how to sell stocks. When a company goes public, it doesn't want to throw too many shares into the market at once. The bank and company make money by selling shares, and it is important for them to control the number of shares on the market. On paper, our net worth was about $50 million. If we issued 50 million shares, they would be worth a maximum of $1 each. Therefore, the company initially issues a limited number of shares in order to test the waters and raise their price. Since owners typically hold a majority stake, they sign a lockup agreement. This means that I cannot sell my shares for at least 3 months. Our company had about 8 million shares, and initially we only sold 1 million. My actions, without knowing it, doubled the number of shares on the market, which brought down their price by at least half. I want to emphasize, I did not understand what I was doing. I signed documents all day long. I specifically left all the business details to Harry and Andrew, relying on their advice, which I naively believed would be in my best interests. But that doesn't make my actions any less wrong. My only goal was to leave the company with dignity and keep my assets without letting my wife get a share of the company I built and without letting Andrew take control so he wouldn't ruin it for everyone else. I didn't want Gordon, who turned out to be a traitor, to benefit from his despicable act, and I didn't think about anything else. I certainly did not foresee the chain of events that unfolded next. A lot of lawsuits were due to the fact that I angered too many people. Most underwriters distribute the risks among themselves. We had 1 main underwriter and 7 others, including, to my pride, Goldman Sachs. I have to admit that being nominated by such a prestigious institution was in some ways an honor. It made me feel like I was really coming out. However, one of the rules of litigation is that it moves at the speed of a glacier, especially in a corporate environment. More personal issues came on the agenda earlier. The judge sat at his desk, and in the corner of the office, the stenographer took notes. Bryson Cowpersmith represented my ex, who was also here, and he was on fire. His actions were deceptive and detrimental to my client's well-being. He specifically sold the shares in order to deprive my client of her legal share of the joint property. He waved a folder with documents. I stopped listening and focused on Roland Thurman, my lawyer. He sat in front of the judge, his gray hair forming a kind of halo around his head. His glasses rested on his forehead, his chin rested on his chest, and his hands were folded on his voluminous belly, which was covered by a tweed suit. I really wanted to kick him to wake him up, but I held back. There were already enough problems to still get charged with assault. And then, to top it all off, he returned the signed divorce document along with the shares. Cowpersmith was finishing his speech. It was true, and I almost wanted to refuse Thurman's services. We triple-checked the terms of the divorce before I signed them on Wednesday, a few days after Ellie served me the papers. Thurman forced me not only to sign her terms, but also to buy out 500,000 shares of Ipswich Inc., to transfer them to my dear wife. Luckily, Preeti was not at home at that moment, because I immediately got drunk as soon as I pressed the buy and transfer button. The judge looked at Cowpersmith with obvious disapproval. Aren't these the papers your client herself handed to Mr. Reynolds? That's right, Your Honor, Thurman said without even opening his eyes. Mr. Judge, these papers were prepared based on the current conditions of the company and not after Mr. Reynolds caused damage to the company through his illegal actions, Coopersmith objected. Not illegal. This is a civil matter, and as Mr. Coopersmith knows very well, IPOs in the technology sector are always highly speculative investments. Thurman interjected lazily. When I sold the shares, their price had just reached its peak. The original price was $6 per share, and it went up $1 when I sold my 500,000 shares for $7 million. My lawyer, fucking Thurman, convinced me to buy 500,000 shares back to satisfy the terms of the divorce. But by that time, the price had dropped to $2.50 per share. Instead of the expected $3.5 million, Ellie received shares worth $1.25 million, plus another $500,000 in real estate, furniture, and bank accounts. She listed the number of shares as joint property, not their value. Personally, I thought she got more than she deserved. However, now she had to explain why fulfilling her own demands turned out to be a bad decision for her. It was a bittersweet moment. I saved $1 million, but gave Ellie the shares she so desperately wanted. This situation completely changed my position on Andrew's control of the company. Before this, I was categorically against it. But Thurman talked to me about this for a long time before the meeting. Listen, Jim, you have already left the company. What difference does it make to you who is at the helm? This allows you to save money, and if what you say about Schwartz is true, they themselves will soon regret it. I had some vague doubts, but I reluctantly agreed. A large stack of papers fell onto the judge's desk with a loud bang. "What is this?" he asked. "If I'm not mistaken," Thurman began, without opening his eyes, "this is Mr. Reynolds' theatrically offered rebuttal to the allegations of manipulation and deceit. It contains credit card statements worth $50,000 that Miss Reynolds spent on clothes, jewelry, and cash withdrawals after her husband discovered she was cheating. So my question for Mr. Coopersmith is he outraged by the financially harmful actions of one spouse against the other in general, or only when my client does it?" "Your Honor," Coopersmith was indignant. "He has a point, lawyer. You are trying to challenge your own agreement." Further disputes did not yield anything new. Everything is as usual with lawyers. As Thurman and I left the courtroom, I asked, "Do you think we can pull this off?" "The hell with it. This is California. If you want justice, get divorced in Ohio next time." But now the burden of proof falls on them, and they are likely to get much less than they demand. Judges, you know, are sometimes people. Sometimes they appreciate clever tricks and well-deserved punishment if it is legally justified. He looked at his watch, took the case, and added, "I still have a lot of things to do, so I'll contact you later." This was a shame because I wanted to discuss a few more issues that Ellie left out in her divorce agreement. I was wondering if I should stop by the house with a bucket of KFC when her cloud of perfume announced its approach. "Hello, Ellie. I didn't mention that our lawyers would give us a beating if they saw us talking like normal people. Although, what is the chance that this will be a normal conversation? Jimmy, what do you want?" My patience was limited, but I admitted that I was curious. A small part of me hoped that she regretted her decision after realizing what a terrible mistake she had made. Acknowledging this would be balm for the soul. Yes, I wanted her to want reconciliation, if only so that I could crush her hopes. Mostly, probably, the nostalgia for the good times and the feeling of loneliness clearly pushed me to irrational thoughts. And don't call me that. "Okay," she grinned. "Mr. R.R.E. Reynolds, I haven't spoken to you in ages." Snorting with laughter, I felt the tension in my chest drop a couple of levels. Obviously, this was her goal. Ellie was still perceptive. She knew me well enough to manipulate me so expertly. I had to keep my ears open, but I also had my questions. Taking my iPhone out of my pocket, I entered the code and checked my calendar. Now I have all the free time. "Would you like to drink coffee?" She nodded carefully, but it seemed to me, with a bit of expectation. Or so I thought. We went to one of the cafes in the courtyard and found a table in a secluded corner. She was wearing a beautiful silk blouse that I had never seen before. She looked chaste. Hiding her frivolous nature was probably a smart legal strategy. Nice blouse, I began casually, but she noticed how my jaw clenched as I said it. She sighed. Everything went to hell. I know what you're thinking, and you're partly right. You really took us by surprise. We didn't know what you were going to do, whether you were going to file for a restraining order or send a bailiff the next day, so we were running around on our own. That meant, she winced, that I had prepared enough things to survive for a while. There was a sale at Walmart, I said dryly. You didn't have to go to Saks. But I understand your feelings. You understand? Yes, Andrew has a habit of not paying for his women, which is why he is still single. Her breathing became harsh. It was unnecessary. We are discussing a wedding. Well, I'm glad you're not just ruining a good marriage for meaningless sex. So what was your plan? Staring into the foam on her mocha cappuccino, Ellie collected her thoughts. Everything should have been different. You had to finish our lie. The company had to take off. We would have a little fight, I would file for divorce, and after or rather you, would have dealt with the pain, I would openly start dating Andrew, and we could continue to live without ruining your working relationship and the company. I didn't want to hurt you any more than I needed to. Andrew didn't want to either. Yes, sure. Prince, when did you start having sex? It developed. Look, does it matter? I don't want to go into this. Andy is a people person, just like me. We are compatible in aspects where you and I were not. It matters to me, because it seems like your plan included sex with him before all of this started. And I agree, you're both cheaters. Looks like the stress of the IPO was a good excuse for divorce. You didn't create this proxy document for something that will happen in a few months. I remember that I was once a package. So what happened to us? Nothing happened, she snapped. That's exactly the problem. Nothing, it happened. You are still the same guy I married as a student. You have your Xbox and stupid movies, but to get you out of the house to some social event, you need a miracle and the promise of sex. Normal adult. So what you're saying is that we're getting a divorce because of my entertainment choices, because I don't want to go to wine tastings or boring shows. Are you leaving because I don't like Brie? My fists clenched with anger. You're trying to make me look like a villain. I'm not a villain. I wanted a soul mate, someone who would value and respect what is important to me. We had to develop together. But you haven't changed, and I grew up and wanted more. So, starting an IPO before the age of 37 is nothing. It's not nothing. I'm proud of what we've achieved, she replied conciliatory. I'm not saying that you are a bad person. You are a wonderful person. You're just not great to me. Sorry, what did you say? I asked again with disbelief. I donated. The hours you spent outside the home. These terrible loans we took out. She wore the same clothes, trying to feed us on our meager salaries. Endured the cold and lonely nights. I listened to my friends who were marrying financiers and lawyers, and I couldn't go to dinner with them because I didn't have money for my part of the bill. I've had to flirt with venture capitalists. Stop, she added sternly, noticing the expression on my face. I was just flirting. I'm not a call girl, but I was paving the way for us to make sure this company got off the ground. As you say, what do you call a woman who sleeps with her husband's business partner for his share of the company? I deserve my share of the money, she objected hotly. I tried to pull myself together. So you equate talking with people to real work. You lived with me. You saw me writing code for days on end. You know how many 18-hour shifts I put in. And yes, I understand that this has affected our marriage. But still I did it. Not you in a revealing dress. Without me, all you could sell is yourself. Certainly not Andrew. You can sell a bad product as much as you want, but it will still turn out to be rubbish. Without my code, he'd be selling cars somewhere in Fresno. And I slept alone in bed dozens of nights, and it gave results. If I didn't support you, you wouldn't be able to do anything. I was there, encouraged you, took care of you, treated you when you were sick. I was a good wife. Yes, a good wife. But as soon as you had the opportunity to escape, you pulled the catapult lever. I raised my hands to stop her attempt to object. However, I can understand, no matter how painful it may be, that you wanted to leave the marriage. Sometimes this happens, but there are certain rules that must be followed. We quarrel, file for divorce, lawyers reach an agreement. Perhaps you get a piece of the company and an even larger cash package. Maybe we're just splitting everything in half. But you should have divorced me because you were unhappy, not because you decided to fall in love with someone else. And certainly before she started sleeping with him. Marriage means that you stop looking for that same package and do not continue to look for a replacement at the first opportunity. I don't think you're a call woman. I think you are a thief. I was hoping you would come to your senses and convince your lawyer to offer me something fair, she replied coldly. I behave as fairly as you. Tell me, has it ever occurred to you that maybe Andrew is just using you to gain control of the company? She smiled at me with a condescending smile. I'm not an idiot. This has crossed my mind, but it's unlikely and doesn't matter. She ran her hands over her body, over her chest, waist, hips. There is a plastic bag. I'm easy to get along with, and I'm very beautiful. I can choose who I want to be with. And if Andrew was stupid and left me, I'd be fine. First, I will keep my shares. The proxy document can be canceled, and it won't be difficult to find another one. This is the power of feminine charm. Yes, or another word starting with the letter S. Her face darkened with anger. I got up from my chair. I will take your suggestions into account, I replied diplomatically. Jim. She looked at me pleadingly. It doesn't have to get ugly. Let's act like adults. You mean bend over backwards so you get everything you want? Certainly. I realized that I needed to leave her. I knew she was pragmatic, but what do they say? Pragmatism is the first step to sociopathy. This seemed to fit. I walked out of court and took out my iPhone. Beautiful blouse, said the voice of the recorder. Ellie was right about one thing. It was time for me to start growing up. There was a period of quiet in business news, which was both good and bad. This meant that the legal issues surrounding our IPO began to receive heavy coverage on Bloomberg and CNBC. Andrew must have been sweating in fear because of this, but I noticed that suddenly comments in the press began to paint me as a tech scammer. Leading programs Squawk Box, they discussed that I allegedly did not write the code, that I deliberately waited for the stock price to rise so that I could then illegally sell my share, laughing on the way to the bank, while the company's employees were left with nothing. Since I'm not a businessman, I didn't pay much attention to such things. But my mother, God bless her, finally asked how I could let the press trample on my name like that. If I don't look after my own interests, who will? Well, except for Swati and her team. However, after talking with Ellie, I realized that Andrew was not going to give in either, and his way of fighting is words and sales. Given that I remembered my back door in the code, I could eventually sneak into the system and completely destroy Arlaye. But then everyone would point at me, and to be fair, they would be right. Besides, I didn't want to destroy the company. I just wanted Andrew and Ellie to feel the pain. My first step was to contact Ellie's lawyer to get a phone number. The second step was to scroll through your calendar. In the weeks leading up to the IPO, I did quite a few interviews with the business press. Perhaps it's time to talk to reporters again. An ugly man sat opposite me, fidgeting nervously. Yes, it was the same bailiff. Bald, with a prominent lower lip and heavy features. I've seen him too often lately. Would you like some tea? I asked. No, thank you. Sorry about that day. Made you chase me. I just needed to finish a couple of things before I let you hand me the papers. Everything is fine. It was one of my most interesting days. Plus, I get paid for my mileage. I laughed and started opening Google Maps. What are you doing? He asked anxiously, licking his lips. I will maximize your income, I replied and handed him the envelope, which he was supposed to hand over. Mr. Reynolds, it's Miss Ellie on the phone. Swati's voice came from the hallway. I grinned, predicting what would be discussed. You, BattleNet, you are simply an indescribable vassal. Hello, Ellie. How are you? Still sleeping with Andrew? A quiet chuckle was heard in the corridor. How could you do this to me? We were married for almost 11 years. I could ask you the same question, dear. Did you give them our recording of the conversation? And these photos? This was a private conversation between us. Car salesmen offer to show me the beautiful life. Photographers are following me on my heels. My mother. Oh God, my mother. You're making me out to be a gold digger and a call woman. Please, please, I answered modestly. You manage this yourself, without my help. But while we're on the subject, who supplied the press with all these rumors about me? There was silence on the other end of the line. Since you and Andrew used your social skills to make me look like a Bernie Madoff-level fraud, I decided that the power of feminine charm deserves at least a little attention from the public. I didn't even think that it would become a national sensation. You should be proud of how much of a package you are. Consider me helping you expand your choices. Remember how long Deborah Lafave was in the news. The only response was an incoherent scream, and then the line went dead. It seems she was unhappy that I passed our conversation on to journalists who were slandering me. Of course, I added our photos from Cancun to the post. She always preferred small bikinis. I was always proud of her beauty. Now I was able to share this pride. As far as I could tell, pictures of her had been on the news about every 3 hours for the past 3 days. Overall, it was a good day. But now it's Andrew's turn. Ellie betrayed me and ruined our marriage, and I lost her part of the company anyway. But I still wanted to understand how actively this slimy bastard was trying to seduce her. Judging by her words, she was still looking for a life partner, but forgot to tell me about it. His call came a day or two later. Why the hell did you order me to hand over the documents right in the gym? His voice sounded wary and suspicious. Great. I saw no need to explain to him that I had chosen this location only because it was the furthest away for the bailiff. His kids were playing music, and Andrew might have thought I did it for some strategic gain or to humiliate him. Let him rack his brains. Great. So he found you. Well, what does it feel like to be taken by surprise? You call this revenge? Do you know how many people suffer because of this? I consider this a very costly revenge. Thank you for your question. What do you mean by Ipswich version 5.0 and all derivative software developments? You can't do this. This will destroy the company. Hush, hush. I don't forbid you to use my software. It's just that since I'm no longer part of the company, I feel like my efforts should be rewarded. Cliff, our ugly bailiff, handed Andrew the notification letter right there in the gym. The thing is, I developed all of our initial software modules myself, with a little help from Carl. His rights belonged to me. They were licensed to Ipswich. I did this because I wasn't sure whether the company would take off, and I wanted to be able to offer the software to another company if it failed. After all, I had a family to feed. The irony was just killing me. Since I was one of the founders with a large share of the shares, the company's profits went into my pocket, so I waived or reinvested the royalties. But I have never signed documents renouncing copyright. Moreover, there was a tricky and very expensive legal argument that all subsequent versions of the program that I worked on also belonged to me. Much like in the movies, if you own a character, for example, Harry Potter, no one can use it without your permission, even if another writer wrote a sequel. Look, we have to find a compromise. What do you want? Well, I'd like to have my wife and company back, but both have been corrupted by a low-life, sneaky bastard. So that's out of the question. How's the stock price? You bastard, we'll see you in court. Oh, you hit the nail on the head. Is that all you have to offer? Ellie is probably doing it for the money, from what I've seen. Saw? His voice became even more wary. Enough about this. This is the past. If all the lawsuits are dropped by you and the venture capitalists, I think we could negotiate a reasonable financial settlement. How should I arrange this? The same way you persuaded my wife into bed. You'll come up with something. I can't control the underwriters. I didn't mention the underwriters, I answered calmly. I'll have to deal with them myself. It's time to twist the knife deeper. And one more thing. Convince your bed toy not to contest the terms of the divorce. I don't want to interfere in your marriage. My mocking laugh cut him off mid-sentence. I noticed that he didn't even try to defend Ellie's honor. You intervened yourself, and if there were alienation of affection lawsuits in California, you would already be answering for them in court with video. She won't agree to this. It's not my problem. If you don't do this, we're talking about injunctions against the use of my designs. But only after my divorce is settled. She won't see a dime. This was not included in the divorce agreement. Ellie found herself in a difficult position. She requested an asset freeze during the divorce process. Each of us could only access small amounts of money. I received more because I maintained the house, but she did not. She was already maxing out her credit card limits and needed the money. Andrew was silent for a few seconds and then said, "You're just trying to destroy the company. It's funny that you only thought about this now and not when it all started. Don't play on sympathy, Andrew. You won't succeed. I'm not going to discuss this. You have my letter. Think about it carefully. I've had my share of fun so far. Yes, they stabbed me in the back, but I responded to them strongly, both financially and emotionally. If Andrew wanted to save his company, he needed to get Ellie to agree to the financial terms I proposed. If Ellie wanted the stock she betrayed me for to be worth anything, she also needed to make sure the company stayed afloat. But after the public harassment, she was beside herself and wanted money. I couldn't imagine Andrew being particularly sympathetic to her troubles. As far as I knew, several reporters continued to follow them and film them. To further anger Ellie, I mentioned in one of my letters that they had approached me for the film rights to our story. Of course it was a lie, but I didn't care. I can imagine how she reacted to this. However, my view of everything that was happening began to change after an unexpected visit. I had just returned from a morning run and was enjoying some freshly squeezed watermelon juice while Tripti prepared idlis for breakfast and Swati took her first of many tea breaks. The doorbell rang, and we all looked at each other. Another bailiff. Swati frowned and went to open it. "Mr. Reynolds." "This is Mr. Loeb," she announced in bewilderment. Harry Loeb, my former business partner, walked into my kitchen. He was wearing a polo shirt and trousers rather than his usual business suit. "Hello, Harry. To what do I owe such an honor?" He looked depressed. "Jim, shouldn't you be at work, rewriting proxy documents or rebuilding our corporate structure?" He winced. "We missed you at the last few board meetings." I laughed. "Yes, it's unlikely." I thought about it and asked curiously, "What do you mean?" "I mean, you were never officially removed from the council. I can't believe this wasn't your first case after I was charged. I came here to hear your version of events. When Schwartz told me that you sold us out, I was pretty angry. You broke your non-disclosure agreement and put the company at legal risk. It was I who prepared these documents and planned to skin you." He fell silent. "I feel like you'll say, but then I saw the news with Ellie, and this raised several questions for me. Andrew told us that he and her were attracted to each other, and you made a fuss about their friendship. Could you really believe it? I found it hard to believe, but I also found it hard to believe that you could grab Hector and throw him out of your office. Anyone can break down." I thought about it. "You're right about that. It's been a busy couple of days. Why don't you tell me about them?" I told him my story. I talked about how people knew things they weren't supposed to know, how people approached Carl about finishing the Arlae project, how I caught Ellie and Andy cheating. I offered to show the video, but he refused. I showed him the proxy voting card, and he read it silently. "This looks like Jenkins' work. I always thought he was a slippery guy. I never approved of this and did not know about it. When I saw those Ellie tapes and snippets of tapes, I asked Andy a few questions, but it was unnecessary because Ellie answered his home phone. So what are you going to do with Jenkins?" "What? Nothing." "Nothing? Why?" "Because as soon as I heard her voice and listened to her pathetic excuses, I resigned as the company's general counsel. I'm not going to work with such a person. When I heard this, I put the glass down and covered my face with my hands, trying to come to my senses. It was humiliating, truly humiliating. Did I have even a shred of that character? Everything I've done so far has required no special valor, only retaliation. I was well aware of my shortcomings. When I felt that I could pull myself together so as not to be embarrassed, I walked up to him and hugged him. "Thank you," I told him. "Hey, don't get sentimental. This does not mean that I sold my shares or left my seat on the board. I'm a lawyer after all. Besides, I want to devote more time to golf. Will you drink something?" I finally remembered. It was an informative conversation. It turned out that the RLI project had to be postponed, and the expected income they were counting on did not materialize. The programmers were unhappy. Hector never recovered from the humiliation of me kicking him out of the office, and his sudden promotion irritated people. Work efficiency has dropped. Besides, Carl also left. Before he met Sheila, he was restless, spending hours writing code. Several corporate executives traveled to Ohio to try to persuade him to stay by offering hefty pay raises. "Does your friend Tourette's turn on involuntary swearing?" asked Harry. They knew about his problems, but did not meet in person. "No, just tics and growls," I answered, a little confused. "Then it wasn't Tourette," Harry replied dryly. "Poor Carl," I sighed, feeling remorse for dragging him into this story. "Poor Carl. Joel and Mark said that if it weren't for his girlfriend, they aren't sure they would have made it out of there in one piece and refused to return." "And Gordon?" I asked. Harry looked at his Diet Coke. "Gordon, in a difficult situation. His wife turned out to be a spendthrift, just like yours. And he couldn't curb her. He's young like you and more emotionally involved. I know for sure that he didn't know about their connection until everything started to fall apart." He winced again, and he chose a side. "So Gordon and Andy are running the company now." He nodded. "And they have problems with finances and personnel." "What?" Several venture capitalists started asking uncomfortable questions. If they could exit their assets, they would do so. The group is led by Phil Turner. "Phil?" "Yes. I don't think he cares that Andy is having an affair with a married woman, but he is extremely concerned that Andy was capable of doing this to one of his closest business partners. In addition, Phil himself has a sweet young wife, which is probably no coincidence. It can be said that Andy's parties have become much less popular among his business partners. If men do not judge, then their wives definitely do, and as I understand it, they are not silent on this matter. In fact, Marge, Harry's wife, fully supports my decision to quit my job. She asked me to tell you that if you need anything, she will be happy to help. Tell her thanks from me." "What about frames?" "Several people left the company because of all this. Not sure of their motives, due to the lack of income and the fact that some suppliers are quietly moving to competitors." He looked at me, but I shook my head. "In general, everything is bad, and they fired several people. It's horrible." "Yes, but what can you do? They are trying to stop the bleeding. I don't blame you for this, but it still happens." We promised to keep in touch, and he left, apologizing for the mess that wasn't his fault. I sent Carl an email thanking him for his support. He replied, "Don't worry, I don't work for them anymore, and I can't believe the horrible lies they say about you on the news. I'm working to fix it. Carl." What was he up to? I had a bad feeling, and it wasn't just Carl. I started to have trouble sleeping. It's amazing that, with a million lawsuits, divorce, betrayal, and bankruptcy, I could sleep at all, but so far I've managed to avoid it. There were nights when I had to take a little medication to relieve the tension, but lately it had gotten worse, so much so that Prathai started visiting me again, and they switched me to decaf. These girls didn't miss anything. So one day Prathai called me. "Mr. Reynolds." "You're on YouTube," she said, looking up from my laptop, where she was supposed to be doing her homework. I walked over and looked over her shoulder. Carl was on the screen. He was clearly nervous. His tics were worse than usual, and every third word was accompanied by a shout. but he recorded a video in which he sharply criticized the press, Andy, Ellie, and told everyone what a wonderful person I was. Not only gave him his first job, but also introduced him to his fiancée. Happy bride, my best friend, who at one time hated even asking a woman for money when we were clearing the sidewalks of snow, was now publicly speaking and offering to give interviews. Prathai, why don't you go out for a walk? I said hoarsely. Mr. Reynolds, I haven't finished my homework yet. Prathai, she left quickly. I lost my composure. Carl didn't tell me he was engaged, and yet here he was, quitting his job and getting media attention for me. Me, the guy who left him alone at a party because he wanted to sleep with Rebecca Goldstein. A guy who was ashamed of him next to Ellie. The guy who used him to build this company without paying him for his work. And it wasn't just him. He lost his job, and so did Gloria, a single mother with a child, Mandy, George from the security service, who was supplementing his pension. In total, more than a dozen people from our company, and apparently the rest were also on the verge. These people went into business with us, and we, as employers, were also responsible for them. Yes, I was not the main instigator, but my actions contributed to their troubles. Just because I was a victim of Andy and Ellie did not give me the right to turn other people into victims. I remembered what Judith told me a month ago. But if you choose a pit bull, be prepared to bleed yourself. They are fighters. That's all they do. That's all they can do. I was so focused on winning and doing as much damage as possible that I forgot about the many innocent victims. Andy, that son of a bitch, was right, although he used it as a manipulative device. Because of my actions, many suffered. I had to change that. My first step was to send the company a letter of intent stating that I would not seek any financial compensation for royalties for the next 18 months. I didn't give up my rights, but I didn't see how freezing their finances would benefit the people who would be most harmed by my actions. We took the company public to raise capital and spent over $500,000 doing it. The share price fell and Andy had difficulty finding new investors. As it turns out, businessmen value honesty, and most of them are married. None of these factors contributed to trust in Andy in any relationship. Those who weren't married were divorced. And Andy was a nightmare for divorced people. As for Ellie, I sent her a personal letter offering to split our assets 50-50ths if she would unfreeze our accounts. I even offered to sign the corresponding document. Of course, there were many suspicions, but I tried to calm her down as best I could, with the help of my lawyer Thurman. Finally, I received a list of names from HR and checked the company directory. Mandy was very helpful in preparing my new project. The first thing I did when the accounts were unfrozen was to write Carl a check for 2 years of work for which he had not received payment. Yes, he wasn't very good at the time, but I made the check significant, taking into account inflation, so that he would get as much as possible. At the very least, I wrote, let him accept it as an early wedding gift. I also wrote to tell him to seriously consider accepting their job offer. Carl is a proud man, and that is why he was so angry for a long time. I suspected that Sheila was pragmatic and persuasive enough to get him to do the smart thing because I was pleased to see my check cashed fairly quickly. Suddenly sleeping became much easier. I sent emails to everyone who was laid off from the company and offered any help I could to find a new job. As you might expect, I heard a lot of harsh words from angry former employees. Many of them wanted nothing to do with me. I left them my contact information and wished them luck. Others gladly accepted my help. I called every programmer, vendor, client, and personal friend to find them a new job. But in some cases, this was not enough. California's economy was in terrible shape. Then I went to extreme measures and started paying for the relocation of some employees. George wanted to move to Florida, where his Social Security would be enough to live on. Gloria wanted to be closer to her mother. I only used my share of the money. What were my motives? I hurt a lot of people, and I wanted to fix it. I couldn't control what people like Andy and Ellie did to me, but I could control what I did after it. To be honest, they were below my level. They had already received their share of pain, and I no longer had the desire to take revenge. So I was extremely surprised when I received a call from Ellie. Hello, Jimmy. Jim? Hello, Ellie. How are you? Everything is fine. Thanks for asking. I would like to meet you. Maybe have a drink somewhere. How about Frank? It was a bar where we sometimes went. Our lawyers won't like it if we communicate. Forget about lawyers. This is not about our divorce. This is something different. When and where? She gave me the information I needed, and since my schedule was now quite open, I agreed. I said goodbye and hung up. You can come in, I said, turning to the door. Mandy and Swati walked in with guilty faces. I assume you heard everything? I stopped trying to hide things from these two a long time ago. They nodded. What do you think? Swati looked at Mandy, giving her the right to speak first. You should go, Mandy said. You need to finish this. I don't know what she wants to talk about, but it won't hurt to listen. Swati nodded in agreement. But be careful, Mr. Reynolds. She's cunning. That was always good advice. I arrived at Frank's, and she was already sitting in the back corner, dressed with taste. Not too provocative, but quite attractive. I sat down opposite her and ordered myself a drink. It was her initiative, so I decided that she should start the conversation. You look good, she began. I have a lot of free time, so I started playing sports. As they say, for a man to go to the gym, you need a divorce. This suits you, she said, nervously fixing her hair. Now I live in an apartment. Is it true? I was waiting for the continuation. Yes. Well, with Andy, everything turned out to be different from what I imagined. I don't blame you for this. Rather, it's the way we started it all that's to blame. You certainly didn't help when the paparazzi camped outside our door, but in the end, it's all our fault. In a sense, yes, I agreed calmly. I heard what you do for former employees, and I want to help. Help? I frowned. I doubt she knew even a tenth of them. Yes, I want to invest money and my time, set up a call center and establish connections. You understand, I know a lot of people, and you've probably already spent most of your funds. But it's a brilliant idea, Jimmy. She has excellent potential in terms of public perception. I might even come to an agreement with People magazine so that they write about it. Public perception. I sighed heavily. She noticed the change in my tone. Of course, this is the right thing to do. But it's also a genius move because it helps people and improves your reputation at the same time. And along with it, the reputation of everyone who participated in the project and also suffered. I could see the gears turning in her head. Ellie. I tried to interrupt her gently. Her shoulders sagged. You won't let me help you, will you? No, I won't allow it. I'm not doing this for public perception. I do this because it's the right thing to do. I shrugged. Of course, one of the goals is to find a new job for myself, so there's no need to elevate me to the rank of a saint. But how did you find out about this project? Your little secretary is leaking information to the press. One of the journalists is a friend of mine. He told me about it. Her eyes narrowed. You sleep with her, right? A barely noticeable smile appeared on my face. Do you remember the Bob and Tom show when we lived in Ohio? She was confused by the abrupt change of topic. In general, yes. They were funny, although strange. I know you adored them. Bob had this phrase, show me a beautiful woman, and I'll show you a man who's tired of sleeping with her. She gasped. What do you mean by this? I mean, if you had asked for a divorce before you started cheating with Andy, if you had been honest, we wouldn't be here today. I would give you a fair divorce. Did you really think you were the only one who was unhappy? But, you never talked about this. Her ego clearly didn't want to accept that I could also be dissatisfied with something. No, because, as you once said, love is a choice. But you forget that this choice needs to be made every day, even if your wife is a snob, even if she spends too much money, even though she can be an annoying bitch. Hypocrite, you're doing the same. You're just looking for a replacement for your little secretary. I shook my head again. No, this is wrong. Yes, I liked it a few months ago, but at worst I was just looking at the window, trying on how it would look on me. I didn't expect you to steal my coat, so I'll need another one, so we don't sleep with her. But that doesn't mean I don't look at what the future might hold. So this is the end. For you and me? Yes, everything is finished except the paperwork. She looked a little sad, a little angry, got up and walked away, leaving me with the bill. But I didn't care. Important things have been done. When all this started, I was talking to Swati about how to deal with divorce. She said, "Mr. Reynolds, these two do what they do in the shadows. You have to tell the world what they did so they can't do it again." I couldn't let Ellie improve her reputation, and I also couldn't take her money. You see, part of my strategy with investors was to let them know that they could sue me all they wanted. My accounts are empty. It would be easier for them to extract blood from the stone. Some of the smaller holders have already dropped their claims, while others, faced with a PR nightmare, have begun to waver. Mandy asked the employees I helped to speak to the press. They want to judge a person who spends his fortune to save them. As Ellie said, terrible prospects in terms of public perception. How did I lose $3.5 million so quickly? A significant part of them went towards unemployment benefits, relocation, or retraining. I owed this to my former colleagues. But Swati wanted to become a U.S. citizen, and the $1 million investor visa program still existed. The potential immigrant doesn't even have to spend any money. It's enough to just invest. She and Prathai will soon become citizens, and they need an investment advisor. Any guesses who could help them? Even Pradeep agreed to forgive me for calling him a criminal. Carl, my best friend, received a wonderful check for the work he did, and in time, some of that wedding gift will come back to me, in the form of my own wedding gift, or something else. Maybe I'll defrag his computer for $1 million. Mindy, my assistant, doesn't complain about her compensation package either. In fact, I've been letting her pay most of our bills lately. She's not complaining, although we're still moving slowly. As I said, I am not a saint, but in a sense, I play the role of one in public. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.